She fed them. She healed them. She scrubbed their floors and stitched their wounds and warmed their hearts by every fire in Blackthorn territory. And in return they called her the serving Omega, the weak one, the girl who was born to kneel. They did not know that the gentlest hands in the pack belonged to the deadliest wolf they had ever ignored. They were about to find out, and by the time the moon rose red over the battlefield, they would wish they had knelt to her first. Subscribe. If this story pulls you in, hit subscribe now so you never miss a chapter. New epic werewolf romances drop regularly. Follow along, turn on notifications, and step into the next legend with me. Now, let's begin the story. The kitchens of Blackthorn Hall never went cold, and neither did the hands of the Omega who ran them. Wren Sable had not sat down to a meal she did not cook herself in 9 years. She rose before the sun climbed over the pine ridge, and she did not lie down again until the last candle in the great hall guttered out. Between those hours she fed 300 wolves, tended the wounds of the border guard, brewed the tonics that kept the pups from fever, and swept the ash from every hearth in the compound. She did all of this with a quiet, unshakable devotion that the pack had long since stopped noticing. To them she was simply there, the way the well was there, the way the roof was there. Useful. Unremarkable. Beneath consideration. "Do you see her?" Old Mother Ilsa would ask sometimes, watching Wren carry twin buckets of water across the yard without spilling a drop. "Do you see what she carries and what she never once complains about?" No one answered, because no one was listening. The higher-ranked wolves of Blackthorn had their own concerns. Alpha Kale Thorn had inherited a fractured pack in a war on its border, and he had no patience left over for the girl who refilled his cup at supper. His beta, Draven Ash, thought of Wren only when his boots needed cleaning. And the pack's golden daughter, Sarah Voss, made a sport of reminding Wren exactly where she belonged. "An Omega serves," Sarah said one evening in the hall, loud enough for the benches nearest to hear. "That is the whole of her purpose. She chose it herself, remember. She could have fought for a real place in this pack. Instead she picked a mop." The wolves nearest laughed the polite, cruel laugh of people who wanted to stay in Sarah's favor. Wren kept pouring wine into the pitcher in front of her and said nothing. Her hands did not shake. They never shook. That was the first thing about Wren Sable that the pack failed to understand. The steadiness in her was not the calm of someone too weak to feel insult. It was the calm of someone who had already decided insults did not matter, because she had chosen this life with her eyes open. She had not been born an Omega by some cruel accident of fate the way half the pack assumed. She had been born with the strength of a mid-tier wolf, agile and clear-eyed, capable of climbing the ranks if she had wanted. At 17 she had stood in front of the ranking council and asked to be registered as an Omega instead, and the council had been so stunned that they nearly refused her. "Nobody chooses that path," the ranking elder had told her. "It is the lowest tier. It carries no honor." "I do not want honor," Wren had answered. "I want to be useful in the way I choose, not the way I am assigned. Let me serve on my own terms, and I promise you Blackthorn will never go hungry, sick, or unguarded on my watch." 9 years later, she had kept every word of that promise, and 9 years later, almost no one remembered she had made it. They only remembered the mop. Her father had understood, before he died in a border skirmish when she was 12. He had been a mid-tier tracker, quiet and watchful, and he used to tell her that the wolves who survived longest in any pack were rarely the ones who roared the loudest at the front of the line. They were the ones who noticed which way the wind carried scent, which trail held old blood, which silence in the forest meant danger rather than peace. "Watch first," he used to say, kneeling beside her at the tree lean while he taught her to read a broken twig or a disturbed patch of moss. "Fight only when watching has told you exactly where to strike." Her mother had died giving birth to her, and so it was her father's voice she carried into every quiet room of the compound, his patience folded into her own like a second heartbeat. After he was gone, Mother Ilsa had taken her in, an old healer with failing eyes and steady hands who taught her which root eased fever and which poultice drew infection from a wound before it could fester into rot. Wren had absorbed all of it the way she absorbed everything, without complaint, without needing to be told twice. By the time she was old enough to stand before the ranking council, she already knew more about keeping a pack alive than most of its ranked warriors ever bothered to learn. There were smaller moments too, ones that never made it into the pack's gossip but that stitched themselves into who she was. A pup named Toma who had been born sickly and was not expected to survive his first winter, and who lived now, 4 years old and loud and healthy, because Wren had sat beside his cradle for 11 nights straight, coaxing broth into him one spoonful at a time while his exhausted mother slept. A guard named Pharaoh who still walked without a limp because Wren had reset a shattered ankle bone by candlelight after a training accident everyone else had assumed would cripple him for life. None of them spoke of her at supper the way Sarah did. They simply lived, quietly, inside the debt they owed her, the way most of Blackthorn lived inside a debt to Wren Sable that the pack as a whole had never once tallied. What none of them knew, what she had buried deep enough that even her own wolf rarely stirred to it, was the truth about her blood. Wren's mother had been an old Omega line descended from the first female alpha to ever break the ranking curse, a bloodline so rare it had been thought extinct for 4 generations. That blood carried a gift that had nothing to do with strength of muscle and everything to do with strength of will, the ability, once triggered by mortal danger to the pack she loved, to shift into a werewolf form larger and faster than any alpha in the region. It was a gift that had slept inside Wren since birth, waiting. It would not sleep much longer. Blackthorn territory stretched from the Pine Ridge in the north down through fertile river valleys that fed 3 smaller settlements under its protection, a legacy Kale's father had built through decades of careful alliances before a fever took him and left the pack to a young alpha barely tested by real war. Kale had spent his first 2 years in power proving himself through smaller border disputes and careful diplomacy, and the pack had, for the most part, come to trust his judgment, even if none of them, Wren included, had yet seen him tested by anything approaching what was now gathering at the northern tree line. The trouble came, as it always did, from the north. Whispers had drifted down from the border for weeks. The Ravenfang pack was moving, gathering allies, hungry for Blackthorn's timberlands and its position along the river trade routes. Alpha Kale had doubled the border patrols and tripled the war council meetings, and still he walked the halls at night like a man watching a storm build on the horizon and knowing his roof would not hold. Wren saw it before anyone else did, the way she saw everything the higher ranks missed. She saw it in the tension across Kale's shoulders when he thought no one watched him. She saw it in the way the young guards flinched at sudden sounds. She saw it in the herbs she had to buy twice as often now, because the healer's stores were burning through faster than any peacetime season should allow. She said nothing to the council. Nobody would have asked the kitchen Omega for her read on troop movements. But she began, quietly, to prepare. She dried extra stores of yarrow and feverfew. She sharpened the old boning knives in the kitchen until they held an edge sharp enough to open more than meat. She mapped, in her mind, every tunnel and cellar beneath Blackthorn Hall, because a healer who knows the bones of a building can save more lives than a soldier who only knows its halls. It was Kale who found her one night, past midnight, in the low stone cellar beneath the kitchens, counting jars of preserved medicine by candlelight. "You should be asleep," he said, leaning in the doorway with his arms crossed, his alpha presence filling the small space the way it always did without him meaning it to. "Someone should count these while there is still time to reorder what is low," she answered, not looking up. "If Ravenfang comes the way the guards whisper it will, this cellar becomes the only hospital this pack has. I would rather it be ready than orderly." Kale was quiet for a long moment. In 9 years he had rarely spoken to Wren directly beyond thanking her for a meal. Now, in the dim light, he found himself studying her the way he studied a battle map, trying to see the shape of something he had walked past 100 times without truly looking at. "You have been preparing for this for weeks," he said. "Longer than my own war council has." "Someone has to think about what happens after the fighting stops," she said. "Everyone else is planning how to win. I am planning how to survive winning." He did not have an answer for that. He only nodded, once, and left her to her counting, but something in him did not stop turning her words over for the rest of that night, the plain, unornamented wisdom of a woman his entire pack had trained itself not to see. He came back twice more over the following week, always late, always with some thin excuse about checking the cellar's structural soundness or the state of the wall behind the pantry. Wren noticed the excuses for what they were and said nothing, only kept working while he lingered, answering when he spoke and letting silence sit comfortably between them when he did not. On the third visit he brought her a cup of the same tea she brewed for the guards each morning, a small, clumsy gesture from a man who had never once in 9 years thought to serve her instead of being served. "You do not have to do that," she told him, though she took the cup anyway. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." It was such a small thing, and yet it sat strangely in her chest for days afterward, a warmth she did not have a place to put, because nothing in 9 years had prepared her for an alpha who noticed her the way she had always noticed everyone else. Ravenfang came 11 nights later, under a moon so full and white it turned the pine ridge to silver. The horn sounded a little after midnight, 3 long blasts that meant one thing only: the border had been breached, and the enemy was already inside the outer tree line. Blackthorn came alive in an instant. Warriors poured from the barracks half-dressed, weapons in hand. Pups were herded toward the cellars by trembling nursemaids. Alpha Kale stood at the top of the hall steps in nothing but trousers and fury, already shifting at the shoulders, already snarling orders that sent half his ranked wolves sprinting for the wall. Wren did not run for shelter. She ran for the cellar stores, hauling every jar of yarrow salve and every roll of clean linen she had spent weeks preparing, and she set up her triage line in the stone room beneath the kitchens with the calm efficiency of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times, even though she had prayed she would never need it. The first wounded came within the hour, a young guard with a shoulder torn open by claws, carried in by 2 others who did not know how to stop the bleeding. Wren had him on the table before they finished explaining what happened. Her hands moved without hesitation, packing the wound, binding it tight, murmuring instructions that steadied the panicking boy faster than any order from a superior could have. More followed. The fighting outside grew louder, closer, wolves howling in pain and rage in equal measure. Word came down in fragments, carried by whoever could still run. Ravenfang had brought more numbers than the scouts predicted. They had brought a rogue pack of mercenary wolves too, hired blades with no pack loyalty and no mercy. Blackthorn was being pushed back toward the hall itself. Mother Ilsa worked beside her for the first hour, her old hands slower now but still sure, until a fresh wave of wounded arrived and the 2 of them fell into the wordless rhythm they had built over years of tending Blackthorn's smaller hurts together. Ilsa packed wounds while Wren stitched. Wren mixed the numbing drafts while Ilsa murmured old comforting words to frightened boys who had never before seen their own blood in such quantity. Between patients, Ilsa caught Wren's eye once, just once, and said only, "You were always more than they let you be, child. Whatever comes tonight, remember that." Wren did not have time to answer before the next wounded wolf was carried through the door, but she carried the words with her all the same, tucked beside the steady beat of her own heart. Sarah Voss appeared in the cellar doorway at some point past the 2nd hour, her fine dress torn, her face white with fear rather than blood. She had come looking for safety, not to help, and when she saw Wren elbow deep in another wolf's wound she recoiled. "How can you touch that?" Sarah said, voice thin. "How is any of this your place?" "It is exactly my place," Wren said without looking up. "I chose it. Now either help me hold this bandage or get out of my light." Sarah did neither. She backed into a corner and stayed there, and Wren did not have another second to spare on her. Near dawn, the horns changed pitch, a single long note, low and grim. It meant the wall had fallen. Ravenfang wolves and their mercenaries were inside the compound. By then the cellar had filled twice over, cots lined against every wall, the stone floor slick in places with blood that no amount of scrubbing would fully lift for months afterward. Wren had long since lost count of how many wounds she had packed, how many broken bones she had splinted with whatever wood the guards could spare, how many frightened young wolves she had talked through their first true taste of war simply by keeping her own voice level while her hands worked. She had learned, over 9 years of smaller crises, that panic spread faster than any wound, and that the surest medicine she could offer some of these boys was the simple, steady fact of her own calm. A runner arrived breathless partway through the 3rd hour, one of the youngest guards, barely past his first shift, carrying word that the eastern barracks had been overrun and that Alpha Kale himself had been seen fighting alone against 3 Ravenfang wolves near the training yard. Wren's hands did not stop moving on the wound in front of her, but something in her chest went very still and very cold, and she filed the information away the way she filed everything, without letting it show, without letting it slow the work still in front of her. Above in the training yard, Kale fought with the particular desperation of a man who knew his pack's survival rode on his own 2 feet, holding ground they could not afford to lose. He took a claw wound along his ribs from a Ravenfang wolf who nearly circled behind him before he threw the attacker off with a strength born more of fury than skill, and it was only the timely arrival of 2 of Blackthorn's remaining guards that let him finish the fight rather than be overwhelmed by numbers he could not hold alone. He did not know, in that moment, that the woman who had poured his wine at supper for 9 years was, at that very hour, holding a cellar full of his wounded together through nothing but her own steady hands. He would learn it soon enough, and the knowledge would change the shape of everything he thought he understood about his own pack. The cellar shook with the sound of fighting directly above them now. Wren heard Kale's roar somewhere close, heard the crash of bodies through wooden doors, heard a scream that she recognized even through stone and fear as belonging to Draven Ash, the beta who had never once looked at her as anything but furniture. She grabbed the sharpest of her boning knives without thinking and moved toward the stairs. "You cannot go up there," one of the wounded guards said from his cot, struggling to rise despite his bandaged leg. "You have no rank, no training, you will die." "I have spent 9 years learning every hall and cellar of this pack," she said, already climbing. "I know where the enemy will not think to look, and I know where our people are trapped. That is worth more than rank tonight." She left him no room to argue further and disappeared up the stone stairwell into the smoke and chaos above. Mother Ilsa watched her go, one hand pressed briefly to her own chest as though steadying herself, and then turned back to the wounded without a word of protest. She, at least, had never once doubted what Wren was capable of, even in the years when the girl herself had not yet had cause to find out. The stairwell rose through smoke thick enough to sting the eyes, and the sounds from above grew from muffled thunder into distinct, terrible detail, the ring of claw against claw, the splintering of old wood, voices shouting names she recognized. Wren kept low, moving the way her father had taught her all those years ago at the tree lean, reading the fight before she stepped into it rather than blundering forward blind. She had spent 9 years learning this hall's every crooked beam and hidden alcove, and she used all of it now, cutting through a side passage that the fighting above had not yet reached, moving toward the sound of Draven Ash's scream rather than away from it, the way she had always moved toward whoever needed her most. What Wren found at the top of the stairs was a hall on fire, half its beams collapsed, bodies of both packs scattered across a floor that had, 12 hours earlier, held nothing worse than Sarah's cruel jokes at supper. She found Draven Ash pinned beneath a burning beam, one arm crushed, a Ravenfang wolf circling him with the unhurried cruelty of a predator that knew its prey could not run. She did not think. She did not calculate rank or risk or the years of being told she was nothing more than a servant. She threw the boning knife with a precision that came from 9 years of chopping vegetables at speed and a lifetime of watching, always watching, the way things moved. The blade caught the circling wolf in the eye and it howled, staggering back, giving her the 2 seconds she needed to drag Draven free of the beam. Ash stared up at her through the smoke and pain, disbelief plain on his face even as he clutched his ruined arm. "You," he managed. "You came for me." "I came for whoever needed me," she said. "Now stay down and stay quiet." The wounded Ravenfang wolf recovered faster than she expected. It lunged, and this time Wren had no knife, no weapon, nothing but her own body between the beast and the beta bleeding on the floor behind her. She had a single heartbeat to decide whether to run or to stand, and something in her, something old and patient and finally awake, chose to stand. In that heartbeat, strange and stretched the way moments of true danger always are, she remembered the only thing her father had ever told her about her mother's blood, spoken once, quietly, the winter before he died. "Your mother's line does not wake for training or for temper," he had said. "It wakes only when the pack you love stands one breath from losing everything, and when it wakes, child, you will not need to be taught how to use it. It will already know." She had not understood him then. She understood him now, in the space of a single breath, with a crushed beta behind her and a wolf's jaws closing the distance in front of her. The change came like a wave breaking after years of gathering itself offshore. It did not creep through her the slow, painful way young wolves described their first shift. It arrived whole, an explosion of heat and bone and instinct so total that she barely felt the tearing of her own skin before the reforming began. Her spine lengthened. Her jaw stretched into something built for tearing through more than bread dough. For the color of dark amber rippled down a frame that grew larger, faster, more powerful than the Ravenfang wolf could have predicted from the small quiet woman who had stood there a heartbeat before. For one strange instant she felt her father's steady hand on her shoulder again, though he had been dead 9 years, and her mother's voice too, a voice she had never once heard in life and yet somehow recognized in that moment as her own. She met the lunging attacker mid-air and the two wolves crashed together in a spray of splinters from the burning floor. What followed was not the clumsy first battle of a green omega finding her legs. It was the fight of a bloodline that had waited 4 generations to prove itself again, muscle memory encoded into her marrow long before she was born. She was larger than the Ravenfang wolf. She was faster. Every strike Wren's new body threw carried the accumulated patience of 9 years spent noticing everything and revealing nothing. The fight ended in seconds. The Ravenfang wolf did not rise again. For a moment Wren simply stood over the fallen enemy, feeling the strange new weight and reach of a body she had never once inhabited before, feeling the way the air moved differently across amber fur than it ever had across skin, feeling, most of all, the absence of fear where she had expected to find it. She had spent 9 years being told, in 100 small ways, that she was not built for this kind of moment. Standing in it now, she understood for the first time that the pack had simply never once bothered to ask her what she was built for. Wren shifted back, breathing hard, blood that was not her own soaking one side of her torn dress, and turned to find half the hall staring at her in silence broken only by the crackle of fire. Alpha Kale stood in the wreckage of the east doorway, his own fur matted with the blood of the enemies he had just cut down. And his gaze had gone very still. That was not the shift of an omega, he said quietly. It is the shift of a woman who chose to protect her pack, Wren answered, already turning back toward Draven Ash to check the crushed arm rather than wait for an explanation she owed no one. Whatever I am still exactly who I was an hour ago. I am still the one who binds the wounds after everyone else finishes fighting. Now help me get him downstairs before that beam finishes falling. Kale did not argue. For the first time in 9 years, the Alpha of Blackthorn knelt beside the kitchen Omega and did exactly as she instructed. Word of what happened in the burning hall spread through the compound faster than the fires the guards were still fighting to contain. By the time the sun rose fully over the Pine Ridge, every wolf still standing in Blackthorn had heard some version of the story, the serving girl who shifted into a war wolf twice her expected size and cut down a Ravenfang mercenary in seconds. Some did not believe it until they saw the scorched patch of hall floor themselves, the drag marks where Draven Ash had been pulled free, the single Ravenfang body that Alpha Kale himself confirmed had fallen to no blade or claw but Wren Sable's own shift. The pack that had spent 9 years looking straight through her found, that morning, that it could not stop looking at her at all, and the attention sat on Wren's shoulders like an unfamiliar coat, ill-fitting and strange after so many years of practiced invisibility. The battle for Blackthorn did not end with a single fight in a burning hall. Ravenfang's Alpha, a scarred, ambitious wolf named Corvin Blackmore, had not come north merely to test a border. He had come to claim territory outright, and when word reached him that a war wolf of unknown bloodline had cut down one of his best mercenaries with her bare shift, he did not retreat. He grew hungrier. Corvin had built his reputation across 3 territories on exactly this kind of hunger. He collected rare bloodlines the way other alphas collected land, folding defeated pack's strongest fighters into his own ranks through conquest or, when that failed, through the grim spectacle of a challenge fight staged in front of witnesses from both sides. A war-wolf bloodline thought extinct for 4 generations was not a threat to him. It was a prize, and Corvin Blackmore had never once in his life walked away from a prize within reach. Rumors of Corvin's methods had traveled south long before Ravenfang ever reached Blackthorn's border, whispered among traveling merchants and border guards who had seen the aftermath of his conquests firsthand. Entire bloodlines of skilled trackers and healers had vanished into Ravenfang's ranks over the past decade, some willingly lured by promises of rank and protection, most simply absorbed the way a larger river swallows a smaller one, without much choice offered at all. Wren had heard these stories the way she heard everything, in fragments passed between guards at supper, and she had filed them away without ever imagining she herself might one day become exactly the kind of prize Corvin hunted. By the second night of the siege, Corvin sent a formal challenge through what remained of Blackthorn's shattered gate: single combat, pack law honored on both sides, winner takes the disputed territory and the loser's pack bows to the victor's rule for a generation. He named Kale as his intended opponent, expecting the alpha of a weakened pack to either refuse in shame or die trying. Kale accepted before the messenger finished speaking the terms. Wren, standing in the shadow of the shattered doorway with linen and salve still on her hands from tending the last of the night's wounded, felt something cold settle in her chest that had nothing to do with the winter air. The war council gathered within the hour in what remained of the great hall, its ranked wolves arguing in low, urgent voices about which of Blackthorn's champions might stand a chance beside their wounded alpha, if the paired terms were even offered at all. Draven Ash, his crushed arm now splinted and slung, argued that he himself should fight despite his injury, a suggestion Wren dismissed within seconds simply by describing, in flat clinical terms, exactly how little use a shattered arm would be against Corvin's forces. Sarah Voss, still pale from 2 nights of hiding rather than helping, said nothing useful at all, and it was left to Wren, standing at the edge of a council that had never once in 9 years asked for her opinion, to lay out what she alone had noticed about the enemy across 2 nights of tending their wounded prisoners and listening to careless mercenary chatter drift down through the cellar grates. "He is testing your strength against a wolf twice your size," she told Kale later, alone in the ruined study that had once been his father's. "He has fought and killed 4 challengers this way in the last 2 years. He does not intend a fair fight. He intends a slaughter with witnesses." "Then I die knowing my pack has one more night to prepare its defense," Kale said. "That is the only currency I have to offer them now." "It is not the only currency," she said, and something in her voice made him look up properly, the way he had begun, in these last 2 days, to actually see her rather than simply acknowledge her presence. "Let me stand in the challenge instead." He was on his feet instantly, refusing before she finished the sentence. "Absolutely not. I will not send an Omega to die in my place, whatever bloodline sleeps in your blood." "I would not be dying in your place," she said. "I would be doing what I have always done for this pack, the thing no one else is positioned to do, because no one else has spent 9 years learning exactly how Corvin's mercenaries fight, exactly where their formations weaken. Exactly how a war wolf built for stealth and precision beats a war wolf built only for size. You have spent your life training to lead an army. I have spent mine learning to survive being underestimated. Let that be useful tonight." Kale crossed the room and, for the first time in 9 years of sharing a roof, took her hands in his, careful of the burns still healing across her knuckles from 2 nights of tending fire wounds. "I looked at you for 9 years and saw only a servant," he said, low. "I was wrong about what you were capable of. I will not compound that mistake by sending you to die proving it further." "Then trust me instead of protecting me," she said. "That is what love does, if that is what this has become between us these last 2 days. It does not lock the person it cares for behind a door for their own safety. It stands beside them, and it lets them choose their own fight." Kale was quiet for a long moment, searching her face the way a man searches a map for a path he had missed on every previous reading. "You called it love," he said finally, low. "Is that what you believe this is, between us?" "I have watched you for 9 years," she said. "I have seen you exhausted and afraid and trying not to show either. I have seen you kind to guards who could do nothing for your standing, and patient with pups who were not your own. I did not need 2 days to know what I felt for you, Kale Thorne. I only needed 2 days to believe you might be capable of feeling it back." He crossed the remaining distance between them and answered her the only way that felt true enough for the moment, without more words, because words had already said less than he needed them to. He kissed her then, quick and fierce and terrified, the kind of kiss that admitted everything neither of them had said aloud yet, and when he pulled back his forehead rested against hers, both of them breathing like the ground beneath them had shifted as thoroughly as she had 2 nights before. If you fight, he said, you fight beside me. Corvin named single combat, but pack law also allows a paired challenge if both packs agree terms before moonrise. I will not stand at the gate and watch you fight alone. Whatever happens tonight, we face it together, the way we should have faced everything these last 9 years. Corvin, arrogant and certain of his own strength, agreed to the paired terms without hesitation, assuming a beta or lesser fighter would stand beside the weakened alpha. He did not expect the kitchen omega. When Wren stepped into the moonlit clearing beside Kale, already half-shifted, amber fur catching the silver light, Corvin's mercenary escort actually laughed. Corvin himself did not laugh. He studied her the way a collector studies a rare thing suddenly within reach, and something in his scarred face sharpened with an interest that had nothing to do with mockery. So the rumors were true, he said, voice carrying easily across the frozen clearing. A werewolf bloodline, alive after 4 generations, wearing an apron in my rival's kitchens. When I finish with your alpha, girl, you will make a fine addition to my own pack instead of a corpse in this one. I do not belong to bloodlines or to conquerors, Wren answered, her voice steady despite the cold biting through her half-shifted skin. I belong to the choices I make, and I have already made mine. Try to collect me and see how that goes for you. The laughter did not last. Corvin's second, a broad-shouldered wolf named Grail who had killed 3 of Blackthorn's finest guards 2 nights earlier, moved on Wren first, confident the fight would be short. It was short, but not in the direction he expected. Wren read the angle of his shoulders before he committed to the lunge, sidestepped, and used his own momentum to drive him into the frozen ground hard enough to crack ribs. Where an untrained fighter would have finished the kill in a single decisive strike, Wren fought with the patience of a healer who understood exactly where a body could be broken without being ended, pinning Grail in a hold he could not escape without also being unable to rise again for the fight's remainder. Corvin, meanwhile, met Kale in a clash that shook the frozen clearing, both alphas trading blows built from years of command and combat. Corvin was larger, and for the first several exchanges his size told, driving Kale back through the churned snow, drawing blood along Kale's flank that steamed in the cold air. Wren, finishing her hold on Grail, saw the exact moment Corvin shifted his weight to deliver what he intended as the finishing blow, and she saw, in the same heartbeat, the weakness in his stance that came from favoring an old injury on his left hip, an injury she had noticed the way she noticed everything, in the particular unevenness of his gait when the challenge messenger first walked the compound 2 nights before. Left hip, she called out, voice cutting clean across the clearing. He favors it. Break his balance there and the size stops mattering. Kale heard her, trusted her without a heartbeat of hesitation, and shifted his own attack low and hard into Corvin's weakened left side. The larger alpha's balance broke exactly as she predicted, and Kale drove him down into the snow with a final blow that ended the challenge and, with it, Ravenfang's claim on Blackthorn's territory for a generation to come. The clearing went silent except for wind and steam rising off 2 exhausted, victorious wolves. Corvin's remaining escort, honor-bound by the terms of the challenge, withdrew without further violence, carrying their fallen alpha's body back toward the northern border. Grail, still pinned and now certain his own alpha would not be rising to free him, surrendered what remained of his pride along with his weapons, and the mercenaries who had fought beside him for 2 nights of coin rather than loyalty scattered north within the hour rather than honor a contract with a dead employer. By mid-morning the compound that had burned 2 nights earlier held nothing more threatening than smoke still curling from a few stubborn embers and the quiet, disbelieving relief of wolves who had genuinely not expected to see this particular sunrise. Kale sank to one knee in the snow the moment the last of Corvin's escort disappeared past the tree line, exhaustion and blood loss finally catching up to 2 days spent running on will alone. Wren was beside him before he finished sinking, her hands already moving over the claw marks along his flank with the same steady competence she brought to every wound she had ever tended, though this time her own hands trembled faintly, just once, before she steadied them by will alone. You are allowed to feel that, he murmured, watching her hands, watching her. Not yet, she said. Let me finish making sure you live first. I will feel whatever I like once I know you are not bleeding out in the snow in front of me. He laughed, a rough, exhausted sound, and let her work. The morning after the challenge, Blackthorn Hall woke to the strange, unfamiliar sensation of safety, and to a truth it could no longer pretend not to see. The kitchen Omega, who had refilled their cups for 9 years without complaint, had bled beside their Alpha in single combat and won them their home. The servant they had mocked at supper had carried a bloodline older and rarer than any ranked wolf in the compound, and had chosen, every single day for 9 years, to serve them anyway, not because she lacked the strength to do otherwise, but because she had decided her own worth did not depend on their permission to grant it. Sarah Voss found Wren in the cellar that same morning, back at her jars and her linens as though the last 2 days had not happened at all, tending the last of the wounded with the same steady hand she had always had. Sarah stood in the doorway for a long moment before she managed to speak. "I called you weak," Sarah said finally. "I called serving a small thing. I was wrong about all of it." "You were wrong about what serving means," Wren said, not unkindly. "I never once thought it made me small. I thought it made me necessary. There is a difference, and most of this pack spent 9 years too proud to learn it." Sarah did not have an answer for that either, and after a moment she simply nodded and left, and something in her posture when she walked away suggested the pack's golden daughter had, for the first time in her life, actually been humbled rather than merely embarrassed. Pharaoh, the guard whose shattered ankle Wren had once mended by candlelight, found her not long after, standing at a careful distance the way he always had, uncertain how to address a woman who had quietly saved his ability to walk years earlier and had now, apparently, saved the entire pack besides. "I never properly thanked you for the ankle," he admitted. "I am not sure thank you covers either debt now." "It never needed to be a debt," Wren told him. "That was never why I did it." "I know," he said. "That is rather the point, is it not? And Toma's mother sends word she would like you to stand as the boy's second guardian, if you are willing, given how much of his first winter you carried for her." Wren felt something in her chest loosen at that, a warmth entirely separate from anything Kale had stirred in her these last 2 days, the simple, uncomplicated gratitude of people she had helped without ever expecting to be seen for it. Kale found Wren an hour later, his own wounds bound, his flank still stiff from Corvin's claws, and he did not bother with formalities. He knelt in front of her in the cellar, in front of wounded guards and healers and anyone who cared to see, and he took her scarred hands in his the way he had 2 nights before. "I spent 9 years being served by you without ever asking what you wanted for yourself," he said. "I am asking now. Stay, not as my Omega, not as anyone's servant, but as my mate, if you will still have a pack that took this long to see you." "I never needed the pack to see me," Wren said, and there was no bitterness in it, only the same steady calm that had carried her through 9 years of being overlooked. "I chose this life on my own terms from the very beginning. But I would very much like to spend the rest of it beside you, Kale Thorne, seen or unseen, ranked or unranked." That was never the part one was waiting for. He kissed her again, slower this time, unhurried, the kind of kiss that belonged to 2 people who intended to have every remaining day to get it right, and around them the wounded guards and the healers who had once looked past Wren without a second glance began, quietly, to applaud. Mother Ilsa watched from the cellar doorway, her failing eyes bright with something that looked very much like tears, and when Wren finally caught her gaze the old healer only smiled and shook her head, as though to say she had known all along that this moment was coming, long before the rest of the pack had thought to look for it. The following spring, Blackthorn held a ceremony the old ranking council would never have believed possible 9 years earlier, a formal recognition before the full pack that Wren Sable's bloodline be recorded, honored, and protected for whatever daughters or sons might carry it forward, not as a rare curiosity to be collected the way Corvin Blackmore had wanted, but as a strength the pack would guard and be grateful for. Wren stood through the entire ceremony in the same plain dress she had always worn in the kitchens, refusing anything more elaborate, and when the ranking elder asked if she wished to be reclassified now, given everything the pack had learned about her, she only shook her head. "I am still an Omega," she said, loud enough for the whole hall to hear this time, the way her voice had never once been loud enough for them to properly listen 9 years before. "I chose that title with open eyes, and nothing that happened on the battlefield has changed what I chose. What I hope has changed is how this pack understands what that title is allowed to mean." Blackthorn rebuilt through that winter stronger than it had ever stood before, its walls repaired, its treaties renewed, its people finally fully awake to the truth that had lived among them for 9 years without a single one of them bothering to look. The Omega who chose to serve had never once needed their permission to be extraordinary. She had simply been waiting for a moment worthy of the strength she carried, and when that moment came, she had met it exactly the way she had met every quiet, unnoticed morning before it, with steady hands, a clear mind, and a heart large enough to hold an entire pack even when that pack had given her so little reason to love it back. She loved them still. That, in the end, was the truest strength she had ever carried, rarer even than the bloodline sleeping in her shift. She had chosen love when contempt would have been easier, and service when pride would have been simpler, and in doing so she had become the very thing the pack had spent 9 years failing to recognize, standing quietly in their kitchen the whole time. Not a servant beneath them. The strongest wolf among them, and the only one who had ever chosen her place with open eyes. Years later, when pups too young to remember the siege asked why the kitchens of Blackthorn Hall still bore a single scorch mark near the east doorway that no amount of scrubbing had ever fully lifted, the older wolves would tell them the story of the Omega who served her pack for 9 quiet years before she ever had to fight for it, and who never once needed the fighting to prove what the serving had already shown, that the truest strength a wolf could carry was the choice to love a pack that had not yet earned it, and to keep choosing that love, morning after morning, long before anyone thought to notice or say thank you.